Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're at. This is Michelle Campbell here with S.M.A.C Productions with a very special interview today. We are here with a very special guest. Retired Colonel Clifford Worthy is a true American hero. He is a West Point Academy graduate. He has been stationed all around the world and he served in Vietnam, all while juggling the life of an officer, a husband, and a father. Clifford met his wife, Lillian Davis, during their college years at Wayne State University. She was a true American Army wife and supported his career until her unfortunate death in 1975 at the age of 47. They have three children: Mark, born in 1955, Kim, born in 1956, and Jennifer, born in 1961. Mark passed away in 2014. Many of you have known his daughter, very famous daughter here in the state of Michigan, Kim Worthy, who is the Wayne County prosecutor. His youngest child, Jennifer, is a poet and a global activist. Clifford is remarried and has been married to Mildred Richardson for 41 years, going on 42 in a few weeks. He advanced in the ranks of the Army over the course of 23 years in various U.S. and international base locations and elevated to the leadership position as full bird colonel. As an added bonus to me, I am honored to say that Clifford is my cousin on my maternal side of the family. So I just gave a quick overview about you, Cliff. If you don't mind, could you let SMAC Nation know a little bit about yourself, like where you're from, the demographics of where you're from, what life was like growing up in Georgia and then moving on to various locations?
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to highlight my career. I was born in Atlanta, Georgia. My extended family is pretty much concentrated in and around Macon, Georgia, and born in 1928. Incidentally, I am the oldest living African American cadet graduate. Thought I'd throw that in and let you know.
Yes.
That's kind of an honor that I enjoy too. We moved, my family moved pretty much entirely from a small town in Georgia to Atlanta. And some of my extended family had already come to Michigan. And as a result of it, the surge in movement from the South, and because of the unemployment advantages offered by Ford and other businesses. So I've been here in Michigan since 1939. I went to Hamtramck High School, graduated in 1944 from Hamtramck High School. Went to Wayne, it was called Wayne at that time, not Wayne State, but I was 16 years old and admitted as a pre-med student. I was a kind of a shaky thing because my extended family had decided that I was going to be the family doctor, but my chances of actually making that happen were about like 0 to none, because one, it was just difficult to get into West Point at the time. Two, I had the grades, but I didn't have the money. My family could not have sent me to med school if I had been admitted. That's kind of the background. Now, how I got the appointment, if you're interested in that.
Sure.
I had no military background in my family. I, um, I went, as I told you, already told you, I was a student at Wayne University at that time, and happened to be at the main building, old Main, they used to call it, one day, and I saw this young man who was wearing a partial West Point uniform. Recognized it because back in those days when you went to the movies, the first thing you saw was the cadets marching, and that's how I recognized that he might have some connection with West Point. I introduced myself to him. We talked, and I shared the fact that I was a pre-med student, and with the concern that going to med school at that time was difficult for anyone, but especially a 16-year-old black boy. And we talked, and he said, well, why don't you write to your congressman and ask for an appointment? Well, I thought that was far-fetched, but I did so because back in those days it was a 3-cent stamp. And so we drafted up a little note to my congressman, got it off, and 2 weeks later, we heard. I didn't expect I would ever hear again, but we did. We heard, and his only thing he said was, I want you to talk to a couple of local politicians and also send me your grades. Well, they sent me the grades was the hardest part of that because it was not expected that any black kid would ever get into West Point at that time. There had been very, very few graduates, West Point graduates, black graduates. So, so that was how it all begun. I didn't get in 1944 when I first, 46, I'm sorry, when I first applied. But Congressman John Dingell, who was the father of the current John Dingell, who recently passed, he was decided, I'm going to get this kid into West Point. And 3 years later, I walked up to the entrance to West Point as a new cadet. That's how I got into West Point.
That's an incredible story. Thank you for sharing that with us. So I had an opportunity to read your book, and for those who are not familiar with this book, it is called The Black Knight, and this can be purchased on Amazon or Barnes and Nobles. And in this book, you talk about in detail about your journey in West Point, as well as after graduation and that actually serving in the Army. And it's both about your career as well as personal accounts of your life. Now, there's a lot of information in here, and I was personally fascinated by the fact that you could recall all of these things within the book. So could you explain to the audience, like, how do you remember all this stuff? Is it just something that stayed in your mind? Did you journal this? Did you consult with friends or other colleagues to kind of gather this information, or a little bit of all of the above?
Right. A little bit of all of the above, but some of the things that factor into this, my extended family, very close-knit extended family, we shared everything. And they were certainly in my corner in everything that I did. So a lot of that, what materialized here was the fact that they kept up with what was going on. And the second thing was, by memory, kept notes, but not journal, and that type of just notes here and there. And as I moved about, I kept notes. And the fact is, I actually started this book many, many, many years ago, and there weren't that many things going on, but they added and accumulated, and as a result, I was able to put it together. But I'd say 60% of it is just pure memory.
Wow, and that's fascinating. And just so people have an appreciation, Clifford is 93 years old right now and has a sharp memory. I mean, the ability, this was published in 2019, the ability of 60% to recall the things that happened to you back in late 40s and 50s and so forth is fascinating. It speaks to the fact that you probably are very well read. You probably keep abreast on things and keeping your mind sharp. So congratulations on that, because not everybody at this part of their mature life can sit here and say, I remember what happened in the late 40s with such great detail. So thank you. And the book, by the way, is fantastic. If you haven't gotten the book, I know some of you out there have purchased the book, and I hope you're reading it and enjoying it as much as I did. I'm going to go to the next question here. And this one is about the time when you were in Germany in charge of the howitzer battery group. There was an incident that had occurred. There was a lieutenant who really never fit into the Army, and his family thought, well, we got to get him on the right path, and perhaps the Army is the good place to put him in. So he was enlisted in the Army, and it's never been confirmed, but it's suspected that maybe he had committed suicide. He was kind of not really getting the knack of it and whatnot. And in our community, typically we look to the armed forces as a place where we can straighten up people and have them fly right. Based on this and maybe just your own personal experience, what's your thoughts on that approach?
Well, it's a good approach, but unfortunately, it doesn't fit every case. This young man came to us unexpectedly. He was shy. He had severely lacking in confidence, and a loner. And he came to us quite by surprise. After a few days, we realized that we had a problem, because the lieutenant, the leaders of small units in the Army, and our troops expect certain behavior out of them. They weren't seeing this with this young man, because he was severely lacking in confidence. So much so that I decided to assign one of my other officers to kind of mentor him and build his confidence, if that's what the problem was, which was more than what we were supposed to do, because we have a mission to perform, and we can't just be babysitting these young people and young officers. But we did, and one day I got a call from the headquarters for the 2nd Battalion of the 2nd Armored Cavalry Regiment in Germany, and they said, get over to the BOQ, the Bachelor Officers' Quarters, right away. I got over there, and this kid was dead. He had a pistol nearby, but we weren't sure whether it was an accident or whether he had actually committed suicide. With his background and how he had behaved up to that point, first thing you would think about is suicide, but you can't do that. The possibility it was an accident. Turns out that he had been a problem for his compatriots and officers with him, but he all of a sudden indicated an interest to buy a personal weapon.
Mm.
Well, that was encouraging to our guys, because most young lieutenants like to have a personal weapon and take an interest in a weapon. They respect it and they will about it. So we thought, well, we're on track now. But shortly thereafter, death took place.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate, but it could well be that if he had gone the usual civilian route, seen as a psychiatrist or a psychologist for an extended period of time, it might have turned out well for him. But it didn't happen that way, and the Army is not constructed to rehabilitate.
Right.
There's certain things they expected of them right away. But one of the things that I noted was that, usually in a case like that, the parents of that young man would be upset. They would suspect that something happened that shouldn't have happened.
Right.
But that never happened with his family. The brief communications we had indicated that you kind of felt that they were not too surprised at what happened.
Mm-hmm.
mourning, they're still mourning and miss them and all of that,
Sure.
but they didn't push the envelope on that. And so that's how it worked out.
Okay, well, thank you. Going on to the next question, you were stationed in many places. I'm just going to name a few: Fort Sill, Fort Knox, Fort Bliss in Germany, as we discussed, Africa, and the list just goes on. And sometimes your family came with you, sometimes they did not, or there was a delay in when they would arrive. During these transitions, it seemed like your wife, Lillian, was very supportive of your career, and to the point where she was, taking care of the kids, one that had developmental disabilities, and trying to be an Army wife and trying to fit in and whatnot. Can you explain the importance of having a supportive spouse in order to get to where you were as full bird colonel, and how any sacrifices that the two of you had to make to ensure that you were successful in your career? And if you could elaborate on that a little bit.
Well, Lillian and I started dating 4 years before, 4 years earlier. And she actually visited West Point 3 or 4 times while we were dating. And she loved it. She thought it was great. So she was early on familiar with the protocols of being an Army wife. And she understood the distaff side of things. And that contributed to the fact that I think it was just part of her construction, her nature, that she was could adapt, a very adaptive person. And she loved the Army. We had a great relationship. And she was never a problem in that area. Of course, later on, we had our son, who was a special needs youngster, and it took its toll on her. We will talk more about that probably. But she was fully supportive of everything we did, and as much as possible, I brought her along. But sometimes she couldn't.
Yes. Yes, it seems to be, I look at the greats of America and in the world in general, and men or women who are moving up a rank into professional career, where it be in the commercial or consumer world or the military or what have you. If they have a spouse, it seems like part of the climb and success of that climb is dependent on having someone that is, right there with you and can support you. And so I think just in reading the book and the effort that Lillian and the sacrifice and the understanding, like you said, she went there to West Point and she understood the task at hand and she knew what you aspired to be.
And she was a librarian. She got her degree in library science, and that kind of discipline that you get in managing a library situation, I think was helpful too.
That's good. Thank you for sharing that. So in 1967, you received orders to attend the Command and General Staff College at Fort Leavenworth in Kansas. This is a very prestigious graduate school reserved for the Army's best and brightest. It was there that in that moment, when a person's skin color didn't even matter, the fact was that if you were selected in this program, you earned the right to be there. And so the whole premise of trying to discriminate or run counter to the goal was just not acceptable. In today's society, we know that there's disparity between certain races. But in that moment, you saw an opportunity where everyone was considered free, equal, and all working toward a common goal. Can you share with us what that felt like?
Well, it was unusual because we had certain other encounters, obviously, the racist thing that took place countrywide. But there was a certain sameness about Leavenworth. We were all the same rank pretty much. There was mostly majors and lieutenant colonels. We lived in the same area, but they had housing was available for all of the students there, and there were different kinds of housing. There was a group of this kind, a group of that kind, but there was never any effort to focus one group of people to one of them and another to that. They were all mixed up together. So it was a sameness about that. Our kids went to the same school. We all shared and went to the same place to shop, the PX and so forth. And our entertainment was designed for everybody. We did the same things. It was just the best word I can think of it is the sameness of it. There was nobody was singled out, or no group was singled out. Said you're going to go here and you're going to go there. Every function we had, there was always a mixture of people. We were all aspiring to do the best we could to ensure an enhancement of our careers. So that was a alive and well thing there. My wife and I sometimes had discussions about what happens though when the kids get teenage age and dating age. You know, we talked about that as well. But anyway, that's I think what what was different about the Command and Joint Staff College. One of the things that there I met Colin Powell.
Right.
At that time, Colin Powell, and we were both majors at the time. And we didn't see much of each other often because we were assigned according to alphabetically. So the P and the W weren't that close together.
Right.
And so we saw each other mostly on social events there. But it was clear, even with that limited engagement, that he was something special. You know, that school consisted of about 1,300 officers from around the world, not just from the United States. And it's about 1,307 to be exact, I think, in our group, in our class. And he graduated number 2.
Wow.
And so, you know, clearly, you know, he was special, a special guy, and a nice guy. I didn't have much contact with him while I was there, but later on, he was a primary candidate for the presidency, and there was some interest in him running for presidency. And he wrote a book. He came to Detroit on the book signing tour, and it was in a Barnes and Noble bookstore that he was there, and the people were wrapped around the building 3 or 4 times to get books signed. There's a little more history to it. Of course, he didn't actually run for presidency, but there was a lot of interest in him doing that. And so it was a good year. And as you stated, it was if you were selected to go there, you had a good promise for a good future.
Even in that program, there probably wasn't a lot of African Americans in it, would you say?
No, not many, but a good group.
Okay.
And as I said before, I think they all were pretty much qualified to be there because it's a very selective process they go through to get there.
That just goes to show you that it really isn't about color. You know, a lot of people want to say, well, you know, Black people are a little lesser than, but in this case, you know, it's just the raw talent,
That's right.
you know, just having that in you, irrespective of your race. It's an amazing thing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, on October 27, 1967, you were promoted to lieutenant colonel. You also graduated that year from the Command and Staff College. Many of your fellow graduating classmates had nice opportunities to work at the Pentagon. Unfortunately, you didn't get that opportunity initially. You were sent to Vietnam. And so Hollywood has given us this image of Vietnam. They've sensationalized it, politicized it, fantasized it, you name it. And some people think that Hollywood got it wrong. And I'm sure everybody has their own personal experience of what Vietnam meant to them. You spent, I believe, a year-long tour there. Can you explain to us briefly? I know it's probably a lot that went in that year, but your experience and what it looked like from your vantage point.
First, let me back up a bit.
Okay.
There were many officers that didn't want to go to the Pentagon.
Oh, okay.
Absolutely. Because for several reasons: cost of living in Washington, travel time, being away from the troops for a period of time, because that's what we all love to do.
Mm-hmm.
The troops. It wasn't always a highly desirable selection as far as to go to the Pentagon. Now, eventually, yes, but not at that particular time. But going to Vietnam was kind of a good thing career-wise.
Okay.
Maybe it's surprising to some people to know that. But if you were selected to go to Vietnam and you did well and you commanded troops in combat, that's the key. It was a good thing career-wise. So looking at it from that perspective, but where it was different than Hollywood and other people thought was there was a lot of things going on in Vietnam other than just the fighting. As a matter of fact, I hardly knew that all the protesting that was going on back here. Mm-hmm. I didn't even know that existed.
Wow.
Quite frankly. Later on, I learned that it was, but I didn't know it at that time. But we had so many positive things have come out of Vietnam. 58,000 troops were killed there, and that's not possible, obviously. But good example. I commanded a battalion, an artillery battalion in Vietnam, and I was assigned a young captain, a captain, who didn't know anything much about what soldiering was all about. Mm-hmm. He was green as green can be. But my executive officer took him under his wing and taught him how to be a soldier. In time, he personally got interested in civilians and population in Vietnam and tried to help them. Mm-hmm. He did that on his own.
Wow. Okay.
And turns out that a lot of Vietnamese civilians were getting sick, and living conditions were pretty horrible. You know, they were found out that they were sleeping on the ground, and bats were all around. And other rats, other animals that were there. And so he took it on his own to see what he could do about that. And in the process, a long story, but in the process, he discovered that the plague is what these people were suffering from. And he ultimately, and the story is a long story, but he became not only the national, but the international best source of information on the plague anywhere. Wow. And so it started right there at Vietnam.
Right.
And the results were amazing. And unfortunately, there's a sad ending to that story. He had served his time, and he was back in Michigan, and I was in Michigan, someplace in the States. But he was killed in an automobile accident. Mm. So we lost a real servant there. Mm-hmm. But the point I'm trying to make is there was a lot of things like that going on in Vietnam.
Yeah, we don't hear about
that you don't
that.
hear about.
Right.
And not that there wasn't some rough times there, and it wasn't a safe place to be, but there were a lot of positives that came out. All normally you could hear about was all the killing.
Sure, yeah.
And it wasn't an easy war to fight because sometimes you never know who the real enemy was.
Yeah, that's what I heard. That was part of the challenge. You really didn't know who were the good guys, who were the bad guys. So, well, thank you for sharing that because I don't think we get enough of those good news stories. There's a lot of movies and whatnot out there, but to hear that positive take on it is it's a good thing. I think we need to have a complete story when it comes to what goes on because we just don't know because all of us don't have that opportunity. But for someone like yourself who spent the time there and can come back and tell us this even at 93 years old, it's fantastic. So at one point you became a military assistant to the Undersecretary of the Army. This is Mr. Kenneth Ballou. For those who don't know,
No, but he was a civilian, but
yes. Okay. For those of you who don't know, the Undersecretary of the Army is the second highest ranking civilian official of the U.S. Department of the Army. So this is a high profile position that you receive as his assistant, and you were tasked at times to even do some of his speech writing. Now, you're an African American lieutenant colonel, I believe, at this time, and you're kind of this one of the assistants to Ballou. How was that received, considering being an African American, the year this was occurring, and the level of visibility that you would receive in that type of discipline?
Well, there were 5 military assistants to the Undersecretary of the Army, and they were led by a full colonel, bird colonel, who was the executive to the Undersecretary of the Army. And so our mission was to serve him and be the uniformed representative that was always at his disposal. And so I don't know how it originally got started, but I think on one occasion when he was traveling and had to make a speech or something like that, I was given the assignment to prepare some notes for him. And I did that, and he liked him so much that led to my being like the speechwriter for the Undersecretary. It was interesting in many ways because I got to travel with him quite a bit to different places. Also, he was the kind that wanted me to give him write a speech or at least an outline for him. And he'd go to some place and he'd have to speak. He would never use the material very much. He just wanted to have it because he's one of these guys that spoke off the cuff pretty much most of the time. But then it was time for him to retire, and he retired. And I was honored by the fact that the speech that I wrote for him there, he read word for word. He didn't change a word.
Wow.
And I felt very good about that because he'd been a very fair person. And then I moved on to other things. But I got that position as a result of initially being, I guess I don't know that talk about my going to the University of Arizona to get a master's degree.
Sure, please share.
The Army, after 9 years, after I graduated, the Army decided to send me to the University of Arizona to get a master's degree in mechanical engineering. And so I went there. It was in Tucson, Arizona, there for 2 years. And after graduating, I was assigned to the Office of the Chief of Research and Development. And that was an interesting assignment. I won't go into detail, but my primary job was to manage the procurement of artillery pieces because I was an artillery officer. And as a result, after having that job we had to deal with congressional committees. For a while, I got called in by the Chief of Research and Development, the general who in charge, and asked me if I would like to become a candidate for the military assistance, the undersecretary. Of course, I said I would. I didn't know whether I was going to get it or not.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, that happened. I was interviewed by the undersecretary and got the job, and that's how that took place. And I don't know if I wandered away from the question.
No. You know, any information that you can share with us is more, welcome. So yes. So when you came back from Africa, because you did spend some time over in Africa in a couple of the countries, I believe, in Africa. And when you came back, you were promoted to full bird colonel. And for our audience here, full bird refers to the insignia of the silver eagle with outstretched wings. And we'll show you what that looks like in a bit. You finally got your opportunity to work at the Pentagon. And your children seem to be finding their way. Kim was at the University of Michigan and, so forth. And all of a sudden then it seemed like the world came crashing in unexpectedly and without notice. It seemed like Lillian had passed away and your world that you shared with her, now you had to juggle your personal life and your career life alone. I know that family and friends did step up and help you out, but you made the decision at this point that you were going to retire. And in doing that, you took a job at General Motors in Warren, Michigan. And if you could, can you share how that impacted you? And do you think if things had happened differently that you would have been made general at that?
Well, the decision to retire was because my wife had died. I had a 14-year-old who was still in high school. And I had a special needs son who required a lot of attention. And then Kim, she was already a student at the University of Michigan. Now, it was just, in my view, maybe I made a bad decision, but I decided to retire because trying to take care of a 14-year-old daughter with a special needs son with all the issues that we faced there, I thought it was just best all around for me to retire. I had not planned to retire.
Right.
And whether I would have made general or not, everybody strives for that purpose. That's why you go to the Command General Staff College.
Yes.
And things like that. So, yes, I mean, I would it's a possibility. But I got a good assignment with the Ordnance Corps, which is another branch of the Army.
Okay.
Ordnance, and I had a good job for a year there at the Tank Automotive Command, and I retired in 1976. As a result, I went to work for General Motors. But I have no regrets. The Army has been very good for me, and I still have great communications with other graduates and around the country, and so I don't regret what happened. But yes, there's a possibility that I could have.
Sound like you were on your way, and I understand life sometimes gets in the way, and then you have to course correct. Before we get too far off, I'd like to take a moment because there's this wonderful wall behind me that I want, if you could just take a moment. We're gonna transition the camera over, and if you could talk to some of the things that are on the wall here for the audience.
The first one there, I don't know how to identify it, that's the white one, there's that.
Oh, congressional record? Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
it was given to me by Congressman Debbie Dingell, who's still congressperson. After I'd written a book, and I was part of at a book signing, she had given that to me.
Okay.
The second one was a picture of me in my full dress uniform at West Point. The original photograph was just a plain photograph. Mildred, my wife, took it to one of these, these places where the artists stand around and
Yes.
what do they call them again?
Yes, I know what you mean.
I'll call it the mall artist.
Okay.
She took it and she drew that picture from the picture.
Really?
Yeah. And in a very few minutes, and did a remarkable job.
Oh my! I was gonna say this was something you had like professionally. I mean, they're professional. Don't get me wrong, but like took it to some special place, and it took a while.
One of those mall artists. She did that and did a good job.
Yes, and for those who pick up the book, that picture is on the back of the book, or the actual picture. And so, I mean, it looks exactly like you. I mean, that's still the same face you have now.
The next to that is just a collection of awards and citations over the years of my career, starting with my time as a cadet at West Point until I retired. And there's I won't go through it individually, but starts as a cadet in West Point and progresses from that point on, from a cadet ranks and singing it to the full bird colonel one on the right there.
This one here, the one I talked about, full bird colonel.
And the others are awards for service or for combat and assignments in the Pentagon and so forth. But that's just a collection of all of that.
Oh, hey.
And next to that is a saber that I carried, and when I had wore that uniform you see there in the picture. In fact, that is the same saber.
Wow.
And then the last one is my diploma from West Point when I graduated.
Awesome. All in stellar condition, and wow.
And one more I point out. One more is over on the other wall there.
Okay.
It's the degree I got from University of Arizona.
Okay. Oh, the mechanical engineering degree.
Master's degree in mechanical engineering.
So it was just, I'm electrical engineering degree. That's my undergrad, and so it's good to hear that we have these engineers in the family. And you did it so long ago. So I mean, and at the time where there wasn't many when I graduated, by the way, and I can surely imagine when you graduated, it was even less than that. So that's quite an accomplishment. So in 1976, you married Mildred, and over time, or you met her actually first, and then you met her, I think on a trip you went out to Delaware, okay? And then over time, your friendship blossomed into a loving relationship, and in 1979, you two married and have been married close to 42 years, as I had mentioned earlier. And Mildred is here, but not in this interview. And I just love her. And you talk about how she was so helpful, helping out with Mark, helping out with your mother and other family members. So it's like you found love again. Mm-hmm. And so for the audience out here who may have lost a spouse, or are going through something and are thinking, am I ever going to love again? And is it even possible for me? I mean, you had this rich career with Lillian, and then, it's like all these things and these changes occurred. And it's like you could have had a defeatist attitude and said, hey, I'm done with this. I'm just going to be on my own. But you found someone. Maybe you can share with our audience on kind of that second time around and what that meant to you.
Well, starting with my days at West Point Cadet, I was had a spiritual side of my experiences there.
That is true.
At the
Yes.
at the chaplain's office there, we were allowed to go there every morning after breakfast, leave the breakfast a little early for a Bible study and fellowship. That's kind of started off, and so that kind of mental and emotional and spiritual thing followed me throughout my career, and I attribute that to the fact that I met Mildred Richardson, and she became the love of my life.
That is
Second, yes, and yes, the way it happened was she was, at that time she was living in Wilmington, Delaware. She's from Baltimore, and she was teaching in Wilmington, Delaware. And my cousin, third cousin, was a tenant in her apartment building there, and I got introduced to Mildred that way, because Mildred a few years earlier had lost her husband.
Okay.
For illness. But anyway, she's been just a helpmate in every sense of the word, because with Mark, my son, she helped me with him. There were lots of needs there that she was able to meet, and she's a person who likes to help.
She does. Yes.
The Bible teaches the gifts that we all have. One is gifts that they call it helps, but that's her nature. That is her nature. And anyway, she helped me a lot with Mark, of course, and other family members. And the other thing that was amazing about how attached and attracted she got to my extended family. You said you loved her.
I love her.
They all do.
Yes,
She got that kind of personality. So that's how that came about.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And that's a feel-good story right there, to be able to have loved and loved hard and then lost and then to love again, and to sit here and say the love of my life. That's fantastic. Well, I only have one question left, and then I'm going to turn it over to the audience if there's any questions out there for you. But okay, you've accomplished 93 years of life, full bird colonel, children, marriages, and appointments and travels and whatnot. Is there anything that you regret or anything that you're also most proud of that you can say out of these 93 years? I know that's a hard question.
That is tough.
That is a tough one. Yeah.
I don't know that there's anything that I would have done differently. I could say, well, and you didn't have to retire from there and sort of wash out your chances of there becoming wearing a star. But I don't think that. I think I would still do that. Okay. Because and that's that I didn't want to be. Sure. We all aspire to be that sort of thing, but I don't regret that. Sometimes I regret some of the mistakes that I made during those days while I was still on active duty that would have been more career enhancing. And sometimes I didn't understand what was best to do. But I don't think it would change anything.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, you have had a wonderful life, and you still are living a wonderful life. You have your memory, you have love, you have a beautiful home, family, friends, you name it, good health. So that's all that I had. I'm gonna reach out and see if there are any questions. Oh, guess what? There are no questions from anyone, which is a good thing because that means that they have been listening and
Well,
learning.
I hope so.
And when I don't have a lot of questions, it means that we've covered all the bases.
Mhm.
And if there are any questions later on, they probably will be covered in the book here. So again, if you haven't already purchased your copy of The Black Knight, I strongly suggest that you do so. This is an amazing book. And I'm not just saying that because there's family snippets in here. And I'm like, oh yeah, Cousin Inez or something like that. It is a fantastic book. The oldest living African American cadet. How many times do you get a chance to sit in and have an interview, sit in his home like I have? Be able to say this is family for me personally and for our community as a whole, African Americans, to say that we have a piece of history right here that is still living that can share that story with us. So with that, I just want to say thank you so much for your time this evening. It's been a blessing for me. Reading this book, I think I told you, was a blessing for me personally. And I suggest you guys get out there, get this book. It's a good read. It's a quick read too. If you, again, on Amazon or Barnes and Nobles is where you can get this book. And I just want to say thanks again. And I want to thank my technical audiovisual guru, Ray, for helping out this evening. And of course, all of you out there in S.M.A.C Nation, thank you so very much for always tuning in. And usually I tell you about what's going to come next month. I don't know yet. I've got a couple of things cooking because there's so many things happening. One of the things that I was thinking about talking about, and we've done this before, is this new Delta variant and the Delta variant plus, as well as this third booster shot if you got the Pfizer vaccination. So I have been in talks with the doctors that we've spoken to before, and perhaps that will be the topic of next month's show, or it might be something about skincare with Dr. Tin. So I got a couple of things in the air, but stay tuned. Keep your eye on the S.M.A.C Productions page, and I will share what we plan to do for next month. Thank you, everyone, and have a good evening. Good night.
Yeah, people on the wheelchairs and you know, that sort of thing, getting the room cleaned up. So if you want to hang around for just about 5, but you avoid all that.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah,
I'm gonna